So it's a little bit with a heavy heart. I want to put out this particular essay because it began as a kind of pro-Snyder Cut essay, but then I saw the obvious link to HBO and Game of Thrones. And it's really just more spelling out a dilemma and throwing it to the audience about where we should go moving forward. I think the dilemma is pretty obvious, and let me just state it bluntly, and we'll get going from there, which is that Game of Thrones was, in my opinion, humbly my opinion, utterly destroyed by HBO with Season 8 and was just an embarrassingly nonsensical disaster from beginning to end. And while there are good moments and some few good scenes, it's basically a really, really ugly creative piece of work. But the same corporation has now done something very good by helping Zack Snyder with his vision. And I understand these fan audiences are not necessarily identical. I mean, I would hazard a guess that the average reader of A Song of Ice and Fire is probably not a big Zack Snyder fan, at least not the ones I've encountered. But again, I don't know. It does seem like these are two very separate fandoms, and that brings up a dilemma where for the Zack Snyder fan, of course, they should support HBO, sign up for the service, and enjoy the DCEU content on that platform. But for the Game of Thrones fandom, I think it's fair to say most of them want nothing more to do with HBO, want to protest what they did, and not give them any more money. So if you do support the Snyder Cut, how do you solve both problems? I think the least worst solution is obvious that you should sign up for HBO, but then therefore not give them too much money, clicks, advertisements, or whatever, in order to still protest what happened with Game of Thrones Season 8. But I think we have to be realistic that from the executive side, if you do sign up for HBOMax, you're basically still giving them money. You may be protesting what they did with Game of Thrones, but they're going to look at it as we still made money. Yes, we lost money, but now we're getting money from Justice League. And I just don't think there's an easy solution because we're dealing with a wider problem of distributors. So even though creative people are different, and I support a creative person in this endeavor or that endeavor, we still have the same distributor, the same company that you have to use as a gatekeeper. And I know people are sort of idealistic and say, well, let me just pirate it. I'll just steal it, and that will solve the problem. That doesn't really solve the problem at all. I mean, I think you'd be very naive to think that HBO does not track this stuff as well. They're very well aware that Game of Thrones was one of the most pirated shows in the world. And for them, the issue was legally and financially finding ways to monetize that popularity. So the fact that it was pirated didn't hurt them in any way, shape, or form. They understood the marketplace for Game of Thrones was huge, and the pirating proved that. So whether you're, quote, paying them directly or not paying them directly, you are sort of still stuck with the system. And while it's getting better by having new forms of sort of supporting creators through Patreon and PayPal, I think we have to be honest, in a lot of places it's still a monopoly. And what's really torn is that HBO traditionally has actually been the better solution. Overall, HBO has been the place to have more experimental content, a place where creativity is relatively more well honored than in other formats. Even now with Netflix, I'd have to say overall with their history, HBO has done a better job of presenting really bold stuff, really experimental stuff, as well as more conventional narratives than probably most media companies. So HBO as a whole has actually been a pretty good, with the fans. But in particular with Game of Thrones, they were pretty bad. I would say even they crossed the line and were just outright evil in misrepresenting what was going on and really slandering fans and trying to skew perceptions and are still trying to rewrite history. And again, doing the channel, I don't want to let that happen, but the Snyder Cut puts us in a difficult situation. If you're not a Zack fan, I understand. It's real simple. I was never going to support Zack. I'm not going to support Zack now, and I understand and respect that decision, but if you're caught in the middle as I am, I don't know what the ideal solution is, and I'm really searching for what would be the best compromise. Sign up for the service, but not, really give HBO much more money, or in particular, I'm addressing UK fans. They don't seem to have HBO Max available. They have a perfect solution. I'll just pay for the DVD when it comes out, and I have no doubt HBO will put it out as a DVD, so I'll pay for Zack's Justice League and not pay for Game of Thrones, and problem solved. But I'm sure there are UK fans who do want to sign up for the service to show and support Zack. So, I don't have a solution. I just wanted to do this essay to really outline the dilemma and what people think would be a good way to step forward and trying to harmonize the interest of these various people, whether it's George R. R. Martin or Zack Snyder or the creators now of Game of Thrones and Justice League and the owners of these properties, whether it's DCEU or George himself. Again, I just don't think there's a way out of this Littlefinger dilemma. I told you not to trust me, and we know what we're doing when we're paying or signing up for these services.